Hey, welcome to History Chats. Yeah, so it's a new month here. We're into May, and that means, as we have for the last few years, we're doing some preservation stories, as May is Historic Preservation Month. So we got a kind of interesting concept here, and well, I'll let Gary explain it. I think just making sure, yeah, everything looks like it's working. So I'm just gonna kick it over and let Gary take it away from here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, as Ben was saying, a couple of different things here. May is Historic Preservation Month, so we get to talk a little bit about historical sites in the city of Wausau. A lot of things are going on, and then we thought, well, how does one reflect historic buildings and things in the city of Wausau? And then we glance on the shelf and we come across a book on Wausau in 1900. So this is going to be sort of the feature of us today. It's going to be our guiding thought that prevails throughout some of the buildings that we're going to be talking about today. It was this book written in 1900 about Wausau, and an unusual catalog, really, of different people, of different buildings, chronicling really what was going on in 1900 in the city of Wausau. Now, we wouldn't think much of 1900, but really, I think this era that is captured in this book is a glimpse into one of the greatest and most notable eras in Wausau's history. I think those years prior, as well as those years after 1900, marked not only in economic growth, but cultural, educational, and political advancement like no other, I don't think, in the history of the city of Wausau. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some things today, of course, remain. This is Historic Preservation Month, and we mark those years since 1900 with a look at some of the buildings in the city that still remain as true treasures in our history. So a little bit of a background. This is the bird's eye view of Wausau a little bit before 1900 in the 1890s, but it gives you a sense of what Wausau was like. Heavy industry, not so much growth to the northeast of Wausau, pretty thin up there, starting to have some growth on the west side. So that's sort of the context of this little talk today with regard to what Wausau was like around 1900. So again, we'll start with this book, and then as we go into this, we're going to be taking pages from the book. And one of the more notable parts of this book is that it does feature a lot of different houses owned by some of the more notable people in the city of Wausau. So we can't talk about all of them. We're going to talk about some of the people that are mentioned in this book. Of course, a lot of things were going, like I said before, a lot of things were going on at this time in our history. Of course, under 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 all of this was the Wausau group and a large group of lumbermen who invested a lot of money. And by 1900, things were starting to change a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the pages of that I just featured was the house they featured of Judge Louis Marchetti. And of course, Judge Marchetti was the chronicler of that history. His book, written in 1913, with regard to the history of Marathon County, is pretty much one of the sole sources of our history prior to 1913. And it was Judge Marchetti, whose house we just saw, was living on Grand Avenue. This is a later picture of his house, his little Second Empire building of a quite unique structure unto itself. In the day, we didn't have too many Second Empire architectural styles like this on Grand Avenue. But it was unique, and it was Judge Marchetti's house. But it had a lingering life after that. That house was built, I believe, in the 1890s, and it came to, when it resided on Grand Avenue, because of development on Grand Avenue, it was moved to here on Grant Street, and this is how it looked back then on Grant Street. Then, of course, it had another move back to Grand Avenue, a little bit up the street, and it's still there. So his house is still here on Grand Avenue, still part of our landscape. Judge Marchetti, like I said, he was a judge, came from Vienna, one of those early immigrants into Marathon County, and he took it upon himself to chronicle the history of the political, cultural, town histories, cities, villages. An incredible book, his book, The History of Marathon County, Judge Marchetti. So then we're gonna go down the street a little bit to 506 Adams Street, the Joseph Reeser house. This is a page from the Wausau 1900, and this is the little house back in 1900. Joseph Reeser. Let me just fill you in a little bit about Joseph Reeser. Mr. Reeser served for 4 years as alderman and supervisor for his ward, and in 1899 was elected mayor to succeed the late John Manson. Under his administration, the first steps toward building permanent streets in the city outside the main business district were commenced, and he secured the building of experimental section of Macadamia Road on Grand Avenue under government supervision. He also started the movement for better sewage, drainage, and the northeastern part of the city, urged the building of school debt, the main sewer lines on Elm Street, and secured a revised plan for the lighting of the city streets. So it was Mr. Reeser who was a key element around 1900 as mayor to start becoming a more modern city. And we highlight Mr. Reeser, and in an editorial later on, after he died in 1927, although Joseph Reeser had been a resident of the Wausau, has not been a resident for 15 years. News of his death, which reached the city yesterday, brought sorrow. He closely associated with him during the years in which he was a citizen here, amongst the most active in the upbuilding of Wausau. Mr. Reeser devoted much time and thought to making Wausau a better, more modern city in which to live, and his foresight and energy aided materially in inaugurating improvements which set the pace for the later growth of the municipality. So again, Mr. Reeser isn't really on our list of more notable mayors, but if we take a look at this era of 1900, here was Mr. Reeser starting to turn the clock ahead for the city of Wausau. And this little house that I just showed you in 1900, here it is on Adams Street in the city of Wausau, what we would call an L architectural style front gabled and side gabled house here on Adams Street. If you need to know where it is, it's Adams Street is off of Fifth Street, a little bit north here of the Historical Society. So then we move on to Eugene Thayer. He lived at 516 Warren Street at that time. Now, of course, Warren Street east of Fifth Street was known as Warren, but now it's McIndoe. This was his little house up the street from here from the Historical Society, and here it is today. So Eugene Thayer lived in this house for many years. It's there. It's up the street from the Historical Society in McIndoe. Eugene Thayer, former resident journalist, dead in 1931. And then it goes on to talk about Mr. Thayer, founder of the Wausau Pilot. So Mr. Thayer was a key player during this era of a newspaper life. He started printing when he was 10 years old, worked in printing houses, mostly in Wausau. At that time, we had a lot of different newspapers, smaller newspapers, the Central Wisconsin, and other smaller mostly weeklies, of course. But it was Mr. Thayer who in 1884, through combining of some newspapers, created at that time the Wausau Pilot. And of course, the Wausau Pilot rings good bells in today's life in the city. But it was Mr. Thayer who ran that weekly newspaper for a long time, and one of the veteran journalists in the city of Wausau that made the life of the city part of the world. Because I think at around 1900, we were starting to realize that we were indeed part of the larger world, not only Wisconsin, but part of the larger world. And Mr. Thayer was part of that in communicating that to the residents of the city of Wausau. Then we can go to Mr. W.W. Albers, 501 LaSalle Street, 1890. This house was built in 1894. This is a page from the Wausau 1900. It's residence of W.W. Albers, quite a distinguished Queen Anne house as it was in 1900. It's on the corner of McClellan and Bella Street in Wausau on the east side of the city. Here it is. It's still here. Queen Anne. Notice the great tower that's part of it, and it still is here, being very well maintained and a big part of the East Hill Historic District. Again, one of the more notable houses. We can mention at this point in time that there were several large houses on East Hill, the most notable, the Alexander Stewart House, that was torn down a lot of the houses of this magnitude throughout the city were torn down. The Walter Alexander House, the Bissell House, a lot of large houses that were really indicating of the great wealth of the city at around 1900, of course, have been torn down. And with this is part of the East Hill Historic District. The East Hill Historic District is one of several districts on the National Register of Historic Places in the city. So if you get a chance to come up onto the East Hill area, take a look, and you can see the magnificent houses, and the Albert House is one of those. Then we can talk a little bit about Elisha Bump at 529 Franklin. This was his house in 1900 on the corner of Franklin and 6th Street. Here it is. Here it is today. I apologize. I took this picture with 6th Street construction, so I could not avoid the orange barrels. But this house is still here. It has changed through the years. It has been modified and remodeled through the years, of course. But this building, is still here. Mr. Bump was an attorney, a notable attorney when he was living here in Wausau with in league with the other attorneys, Neil Brown, Kreitzer, a lot of other attorneys were quite notable in this at this point in time, and Mr. Bump certainly was a part of that. Mr. Elijah Bump, he died in 1904. Again, another side picture, some remodeling, but a good example of an Italianate house on the corner of 6th and Franklin here in downtown Wausau. A part of the, while we're talking about historic districts, it is part of the Andrew Warren Historic District in the center city of Wausau. And there it is on the corner of 6th and Franklin across the street from Zion Lutheran Church. Again, another photo. So with that, I just had a few minutes of talking about some of the distinguished buildings, the distinguished houses that were here in 1900 and some of the people associated with them. Whenever we talk about buildings, we talk about the people, either the architect perhaps, but the people living. It was the people and around 1900 that really started to make Wausau what it is. And we can see as Wausau came into the 1900s, the rapid growth of the city, like I said before, culturally, educationally, politically, Wausau was starting to change. And this book and the history that resided here in 1900, a good part of it is still here as evidence through its buildings and its homes. Take a ride around Wausau and you can certainly see some of the remaining parts of 1900 that are still with us. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think this is a cool idea. It is also interesting. Gary and I were trying to talking a little bit about this of how kind of strange it is that they decided, hey, let's show a bunch of houses of these prominent people. It'd be kind of weird to do that today, but well, maybe not. I don't know. Definitely makes for an interesting look back at that era in time. So, what's happening next week? I hear you probably, well, I don't hear you asking, but maybe you're wondering. So what we're going to do is going to take a walking tour that was created in 1976. Actually, here, I'll do this. So we have this walking tour. It was a brochure that was published in 1976, and yeah, we're gonna just kind of go through it and see how it compares to how we would do a tour today, and just kind of see how back in the 70s they were looking at trying to get people interested in historic preservation in an interesting way. So look forward to seeing that next week. And yeah, I think that probably covers it. Um, yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for some more history chats.